Hi y'all, and welcome back to my channel. And welcome to a video idea I sort of came across as I was scrolling through Trend Mood, I believe for another video. Because as I was scrolling through, I was going through and I think I scrolled through back to like 2018, maybe 2017, and I was like, you know what? I don't remember 99.99999% of this stuff that gets released, which is kind of comical considering how like overhyped and crazed and like whatever people get every time Trend Mood posts something new. It's like, look at this beauty blender, look at this release, and everyone's like, ooh, this is the next big thing. For it to just then be forgotten sort of in the catacombs of all these other makeup releases. Because makeup releases, whether it's eyeshadow palette, whether it's blush, highlighter, lip products, we are getting something new nearly every single day. And as such, it's a little bit difficult to keep up with everything. I don't have enough brain space to continuously be remembering all the unmemorable things that get released. So today, I thought it would be interesting to talk about those eyeshadow palettes that I just forgot existed. These things that sort of just came and went and then just went off into the Valhalla of makeup of yesteryear. Like it comes, it gets overhyped, we get excited about it, and then it's gone. Not everything has the significant staying power of Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance, Jeffree Star Blood Sugar, those palettes that then become tried and true to a large amount of the community. Obviously, this is subjective. If I talk about a palette that you love, that is your end-all be-all favorite forever in your mind, never forgotten palette, then that is fan-tucking-fastic. You keep doing you, boo-boo, and you keep using that palette to your heart's content. This is just for me, my perspective, my whatevers. And just because I talk about a palette I forgot about does not mean it's not good, it's not got great quality, it isn't something you love. This is just me discussing my makeup memories, or rather the lack thereof. And we're gonna start off with probably the palette that kind of just got this ball rolling, and that is, let me scoot aside so I can insert my cute little picture here, because I am a professional YouTuber, even though I don't get paid enough to be a professional YouTuber, but that's a story for another time. But the Too Faced Birthday palette. Now, I do recall anti-hauling this because this palette was released during a time that I was coming to the realization that Too Faced was a brand that did not possess any end-all be-all formula for me in the eyeshadow department. Blush, all the blushes that they've created and then discontinued, love them. And I have heard that apparently they've reformulated and are re-releasing their Love Flush blushes, so that's fun. But as I came to the conclusion that Too Faced doesn't have any kind of formulas that I'm jumping up and down and getting really excited to buy, this palette was one of those things that sort of seemed, for what it was meant to represent, it was a little bit anticlimactic for me, because this was a palette representing, I'm not entirely sure which birthday hallmark, one of the significant ones, and what they did was that they literally took eyeshadow shades. I'm not sure if they were from a whole palette or if they just sort of picked and chose between eyeshadow palettes that they've already released over the years. And they took those shades and put them in a long row, and then they said, all right, this isn't quite enough. This isn't really significant enough to express the love we have for our company. So they took those shades and they decided to reformulate them. Now, in some cases, the reformulation sort of had I believe, a shift in color, a shift in tone, whereas I feel what this palette is if you're going to reformulate these shades, what's the point in having the unreformulated shades? This may just be me, but when it comes to the concept of reformulation, I typically tend to think that that means that they're improving, that they're creating a better version of what already existed. There have been products that have been pulled that have then been reformulated and re-released, whereas with this palette, the reformulated shades were in direct comparison to the shades that they had originally made. For me, it made the palette very unmemorable in the sense of I didn't think the concept was very strong, as well as if you have 2 rows of essentially the same shades, it doesn't make for a very versatile palette. It doesn't make for a palette that's gonna give me a lot of depth, a lot of interest, something that I'm going to be able to use in a myriad of ways. The packaging was really cute. I absolutely adored that pink, glitterly long extended travesty. I was down for that aspect of it, but I really wasn't. And I feel that this was at a time when Too Faced was also struggling a bit. In my opinion, they're still struggling. But at this point with this eyeshadow palette, they were just like, oh, look, happy birthday to us. We got to come up with something. It was kind of in the same way that I feel when Lime Crime did their birthday palette. They're just like, all right, we got to come up with something to be a significant release to represent us having a birthday. And it just kind of fell really flat. It's not one that I saw a lot of people reviewing, a lot of people loving. Now, in their defense, I don't watch a lot of beauty content on here that's just kind of norm content, so I could be exceptionally and very wrong. A lot of brands that I don't necessarily enjoy a lot from have very die-hard cult-like followings. But looking at this thing and watching it scroll through Trend Mood and picking it up, I was like, wow, yeah, that was really one that for me was in one ear and then immediately out the other. Another very unmemorable release, which is also something I anti-hauled, was summer of 2018, I want to say, which doesn't seem that long in normal human years, but in makeup years that might as well be 20 centuries. And these are those little 4-pan quads that they did. I remember when these were released because they released them with these really cool, nifty, like frameless sunglasses that were these really fun colors. And I remember thinking, I would really like those. But the quads themselves did absolutely nothing for me. I remember they were like, oh, well, we have this cool-toned one and this warm-toned one, and they're put together to create the perfect little traveling quad. And it was just very anticlimactic, as I feel a fair amount of these releases really were, which makes them why they're so unmemorable, at least to me. Because for me, when you're releasing a product, when you tend to add all those little extras to it, like when you're like, oh, we're releasing shades with it, we're releasing jewelry, we're releasing all these little extra add-on frills, tells me, sends the message to me, sends the message to my brain that you're actually not releasing this stuff on the merit of the makeup alone. If you have to have all these little interesting things that are like, oh, well, we're releasing this with this, when the products you're releasing with the makeup stuff is more interesting than the makeup you've released, that's a little bit of a problem in my mind. And maybe for you, these were the end-all, be-all, absolute fantastic warm tone and cool tone quads. I don't know. But at the time, Anastasia was still sort of riding. They hadn't really fallen to the point that I feel they've fallen to now. Sort of in the same way with Too Faced. We hadn't reached that precipice that then went into a descent. You know, we didn't have the crazy year, or was 2018 the crazy year of ABH releases? All this stuff getting released, I can't even get my timeline straight. But looking back on these, I'm like, yeah, I could really see how they could have just kind of been lost, because I feel, at least with the group of people that I talk makeup with, the price point that Anastasia has on something like their quads, you're like, okay, why would you pay that price point to get 4 simple, basic eyeshadows when you could take that money and put it into Colourpop or put it into Give Me Glow, who their eyeshadows are a fairly good price, but you also get like a huge freaking amount for the money you spend? Why would we be buying these Anastasia quads when we could literally get the same thing from a bunch of different brands for less money or better quality? It was something that wasn't really necessary. It was something that wasn't innovative. It was something that really just wasn't well done compared to palettes that they'd released, because part of the reason we liked ABH palettes is because they were a really good price compared to buying ABH singles. You got a lot of shades for $42, $45, and then when you've got 4 eyeshadows for probably around half of what you would pay on a whole palette, why pay half when you could just add a little more and get a whole palette rather than 4 or 8 shades? It isn't something that's really able to sustain itself on the market, sort of in the same way that high-end eyeshadow, single eyeshadows, aren't able to sustain themselves either. Because if you're a company like Urban Decay or like Dose of Colors or any of those companies who are like, we're selling these single shadows in this single componentry and we're charging $18, $22, $24, $28 for a single shadow, when there are so many companies that you can get single shadows without the bulky componentry for a lot less money. It just doesn't really make sense compared to all the other things that you have access to on the market. Alright, then let's talk about a product that I actually owned. I purchased said product. I reviewed said product. If I remember, I will leave the review down below. This was when Soraya was having a little bit of a struggle moment. This was when I hadn't really come to the anti-consumeristic. I was a little bit wishy-washy in my stances. And that was Morphe. And not just Morphe. That was Morphe and Jaclyn Hill. And not just Morphe and Jaclyn Hill. It was the Morphe and Jaclyn Hill Vault palettes. Because let me tell you, when I saw the green one, the like armed and gorgeous, and then the like dark potiony one, I was having a moment with those color stories. There's the purple one that was whatever, and then you had the Morphe, the poor man's modern renaissance, you know, all of that aside. These were palettes that I feel to some would be considered memorable because of just the absolute cluster blank that was the release of that. We had awful quality, we had patchiness, we had fallout, we had issues. It was a whole big giant controversy. But for me, I was in it for the eyeshadow. I was in it because I wanted to plaster khaki greens all over my lids, all those deep dark blues I wanted to have all up on my face. But these were palettes that really came and went for a couple different reasons. Number one, people wanted to block them out of their mind because the quality was abysmal, and then all of the whatever we had to endure, all the BS that Morphe and Jaclyn fed us with, like, oh no, we totally redid them and we totally destroyed all of them and the quality should be amazing and perfect and phenomenal, and I wouldn't put anything out there that I don't have my stamp of approval on. I'm sorry, but at this point we know both Morphe and Jaclyn here are just out for the big buck. They couldn't care less whether we get patchy, fallouty eyeshadows. They really couldn't. If I remember correctly, the shimmers in mine were a pretty big joke as well, especially the ones in that purple palette. They were just awful. I held on to them for a time, you know, being like, oh, well, I have them. The colors are pretty. I want to use them. But you can't use a palette that's basically unusable. So maybe it's a sense of out of sight, out of mind. I don't have it in my collection anymore. I decluttered that shit. Can't remember who I gave it to. Probably could have put it in the trash and felt fine about it. But these were just 4 palettes. Like the whole vault. Is it even still available anymore? I mean, Morphe, when it comes to them and Jaclyn Hill, I immediately think about the first palette and then the second palette, which I still have slight of a burning lust for. One of y'all told me you had it and the quality's really good, and I was like, I really kind of want it. But as y'all know, I am not purchasing from Morphe anymore. And so recalling these in kind of the history of makeup, they were really ones, I find it kind of funny how they were able to have such an intense moment on the market. Not for anything good, not for anything amazing, but for them being awful quality, for the whole controversy involved, you know, the reformulation and the resending out and everything like that. But yet they were still able to still be very unmemorable. Perhaps because the quality was so bad. But for me, as I was scrolling through, this was something where I was like, oh yeah, That was a big deal. That was a whole thing. And then they've then turned into a whole thing to being just a faint footnote in my makeup memory. Then we might as well talk about a discussion point. This is sort of a just one company, not a bashing, but just an observation. Because we're talking about palettes that I've forgotten about, unmemorable makeup in that sense. And we have to bring to the forefront Colourpop. Because Colourpop is a company that has replaced Too Faced in the excessive amount of makeup that it releases. I remember we used to get all upset and hot and bothered about Too Faced releasing like 4 or 5 palettes a year, and then Too Faced literally came up, and Colourpop came up and was like, hold my beer, because they release a new collection at least every other week. They release a new eyeshadow palette, a new product this, a new product that. And one thing I wanted to point out is the fact that when you are a company that releases so much stuff, and you all know, if you're here, you're watching this, you've heard me talk about this before, Colourpop just doesn't know when to stop. And not only do they not know when to stop, they still continue to release all these things. And when you release so many different collections and eyeshadow palettes, I was scrolling through Trendmood, and what made me come to the realization of the oversaturation was I made it to 2018, 2017, and I was like, I'm not seeing a Colourpop release every other week. I had gone back far enough into the feed to reach a point when they weren't releasing so many things, when they were still kind of viable in the sense of not having so much stuff on the market. And then as I scrolled back up, I was like, all right, so we haven't released a lot. I was scrolling back up and I was like, well, let's take a moment and let's take stock of what they're releasing. And as I went through, you have the slight faint memory of seeing it on Trendmood, because I look at Trendmood for my anti-hauls and stuff like that. So you had that type of memory. But other than the memory of you being all like, oh, here's a Colourpop release, I just kept seeing things that I was like, I forgot that happened. I don't remember seeing that. Where did that come from? When was that released? When you are a company that releases so much that you are even unable to keep up with yourself, it is very difficult to leave an impact on the community. It is difficult to be any kind of memorable, I can speak, because you kind of can't have the best of both worlds, or at least you can't have the best of both worlds in any significant way. Either you want to completely oversaturate the market so it's nothing but Colourpop, Colourpop this, Colourpop that, Colourpop has absolutely everything, or you can actually pay attention to the ebb and flow of what people want from makeup and create collections or curate eyeshadow palettes that are going to be memorable. I remember when the Just My Luck eyeshadow palette came out. I absolutely lost my mind. I still consider that to be memorable. But what they did after that, they were like, oh, okay, they like these monochromatic palettes, and instead of just releasing the monochromatic palettes, they were like, well, when we come up with them, we need to create color-themed collections. I remember when they did the main squeeze one, which I absolutely love. Y'all know them red tones. And they had all these like watermelon extras and these watermelon ads on and watermelon this and this and this and color-coded this. It was less about that memorable moment, less about that product that really started for them, those monochromatic palettes, and it turned into the, well, we have this one memorable thing, let's then take that and add all of this stuff on into it. We can't just do the one thing. We have to make it a big, giant collection. And ever since they started doing that, they've done it for nearly all of the monochromatic releases since. We can't just have the palette with, 2 coordinating blushes. We have to have the palette. We have to have the blushes. We have to have the Super Shock shades. We have to have all the Fourth Ray Beauty serums and all of the skincare. We have to have a lippy stick collection or, lip gloss and liquid lipstick duos. We've got to have glitter added to it. We've got to have the glosses, and we need this and that and all these different things. That when you release all those different things, you honestly become distracted. You don't really see, it's a sense of you don't see the forest for the trees. There's just all these things coming on. And once again, it's not about that memorable moment with the monochromatic palette. It has to be all about all these other different things. It becomes more about the vastness or about the kitschiness or about all the little whatevers that go into it rather than just that one thing. And the true element of it just gets lost. It fades away into obscurity because it's getting suffocated by all these little add-ons and extras because they're cute and strawberry and pineapple and blueberry and all these color-coded things. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy a color-coded moment. I am a symphony in coordination. But Colourpop just out here putting anything and everything out there. And as such, as a result, I don't even care anymore. I scroll through and I see new from Colourpop and I'm like, I couldn't care less. There have been a lot less things that I've been interested by Colourpop because of how much they release. It's become repetitive. It's become monotonous. I couldn't care less. I don't care about the super shock that they do. I am tempted ever and always by blushes they release, but everything else is just all these little things that create a completely unmemorable company. Like it used to be when they would release something, it would be well thought out, somewhat revolutionary, and it would be good, consistent quality. Long gone are the days of that Yes Please palette that they did that everybody had to have, that was always sold out, that was the small poor man's version, inexpensive, of the Natasha Denona whatever palette she did back then. Whereas now we're just re-releasing the same 15 shades of brown, and now we're having the audacity of putting a pop of blue in it. Colourpop has just become a company to me that doesn't know when to say no, doesn't know how to step back from what they're releasing. They have gone off the rails. They are a crazy train plummeting into absolute obscurity simply because they keep releasing so much. I feel like, for me, you can't be excessively oversaturated and be memorable because there's too much. The eye gets confused. There's just not a way to zone in on those things that are memorable because they're not creating them anymore because they're creating too many things. Whew! That was a moment. That was a discussion topic. Something else that I haven't really, that really just kind of went over my head and in my ears and out my ears was the BH Cosmetics mini Zodiac palettes. I remember when the first large one came out and even the second large one came out, and a lot of people really love them. BH Cosmetics is a company that I feel has a lot of hidden gems. I love the highlighter palettes that I have from them. I love those Sweet Shop eyeshadow palettes. You know, they've got some of those things that are memorable, that are really significant and stand out from the other things that they've released. And they're also a company that I feel at this point do release a lot. And part of the reason I feel that these specific, the little mini Zodiac palettes are so forgettable is because they were fairly uninspired. And not only were they uninspired just on their own, they were uninspired in concept because they were supposed to be like one for Taurus, one for Aquarius, one for Aries. You know, each of the zodiac signs had its own little color combination. And a lot of people saw these and were like, yeah, you know, that's not really how I see Gemini being portrayed. And I must admit, when I saw mine come out, the Taurus one, I was like, well, that's boring. And so you've got these palettes, and they release, you have to understand, they have to, 12? I'm unfamiliar. I feel so horrible because I'm all whatever, pagan and shiz and all that, and I don't know how many zodiac signs there are. I think there are 12. Please don't come for me. And each one of them was just sort of you know, and with BH Cosmetics, it was like, oh boy, we're coming out with another zodiac palette, another mini one, and people were like, okay, all right. It's sort of also how I feel about those the BH Cosmetics, the Gemstone, the Birthstone palettes, because there's only so much you can do with the inspiration you're taking from. You know, if you've got like one thing, you're like, all right, how much can we really elaborate on this without going completely into left field? Which I feel they went into left field a couple of times anyway, because they're just trying to stretch the inspiration. They're like, we gotta pull some things from this. We gotta make it cohesive. We gotta make it look good. And it just really fell short several times. And after you have one that's kind of like, unmemorable, that's like, okay, they've got a lot to create. Here's the artistic dud. But when you have multiple ones where every time you release these things, it's like, well, that one's unmemorable, that one's unmemorable, both of those. When you have more fails than wins, it's just become a consistent trend of unforgettableness or forgettableness. And I don't even know if these palettes have a die-hard following, but just like going through and scrolling, and I was like, oh, they released this, star sign, that one's awful. Oh, they released this one, that one's boring. And I understand this is just my personal opinion. If you love this shiz and it's your absolute favorite, like I said, that's fan-tucking-fastic. But for me and what I'm looking for, the birthstone ones and the astrological ones were just really not cutting it. It's like they had a good idea with the whole zodiac thing, because when you have all of it together and you've got all those different color things that you can put into one palette, that works better artistically than taking that one color and trying to expand it into its whole palette on its own. And in my opinion, they haven't done it fairly well. Like, they'll have this like boring color palette story, and then they're like, well, we've got this one or two shades that actually really correlate to the sign, but that's about it. It makes for just all of these little duds happening and it being a constant stream of uninspired mini palettes. It was sort of a, you should have quit while you were ahead, or maybe you should have taken more time to figure out how you were going to do these mini versions, because for the most part, for me, the majority of them are just throwaways. I don't see a lot of integral value in them, at least for me, what I look for in my makeup and what I believe is on the market. But like I said, that is just me. Would love to hear what y'all have to say about these palettes down below. Let me know if the quality is good. Let me know what you feel about the color story. I am not the end-all be-all judge on makeup that is released within the beauty community. And I would love to hear what y'all have to say about the stuff I talk about, as well as tell me a palette you forgot about, where you were just sitting there minding your own business and this palette popped into your eye and you're like, wow, that did really happen. But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah!